video, I'd like to recap triads very quickly. We'll also be looking at triads contained within the major scale and some chord progressions also contained within the major scale. We'll also be giving the major scale a number system so that we know which scale degrees we're actually using. On top of that, we'll also be looking at some open position triads as well as the closed position triads that we're more accustomed to. First of all, just to remind ourselves of what a triad actually is, if we take a major scale, play the first note, miss the second note, play the third note, miss 4 and play the fifth note, 1, miss 2, play 3, miss 4, play 5. That gives us a triad, so it's every other note. And in this case, it's a major triad because it has a major third, and it's always the third that tells you whether a triad or a chord is major or minor. Another thing to notice is from the major third coming up to the fifth is a minor third. And this is also how triads are built, by stacking intervals of a third on top of each other. So root, third, fifth, major third followed by minor third gives you the perfect fifth. Now there's two ways to play these triads. We can start on our second finger and come up to the next string, or we can play it across 3 strings starting on our fourth finger like this. And of course, if we play all the notes at once simultaneously, we have a chord. If we play them individually, we have an arpeggio or a broken chord. Now, if I take that major third and flatten it by a semitone, we now have a minor triad. So there's our minor third and there's our perfect fifth on top. And notice how the thirds have swapped places. Now that I have a minor third, to get me to the fifth, we now have a major third in between the flat 3 and the 5 there. So if I flatten that perfect fifth by a semitone, we now have a diminished triad. And notice again how this is built from a minor third followed by another minor third. And of course, with this diminished fifth, or flat 5 if you like, we now have a tritone in between the root and the diminished fifth there as well. So it sounds quite dissonant. And it really wants to resolve upwards like that. Going back to our major triad, if I sharpen the fifth degree by a semitone, we now have an augmented triad. Of course, augmented means to get larger or further away from the root. So that's an augmented triad. We can also play it like that. And again, notice how it's built. We have a major third followed by another major third to take us to the augmented fifth. Root, third, augmented fifth. Root, third, augmented fifth. So there's the 4 main types of triad that we have in the triad family. In the major scale, you won't find the augmented triad in there because that really belongs to the harmonic minor or melodic minor. It's also found in the whole tone scale. You can build a triad on every degree of the major scale. And one way to look at the major scale is to give every note in the major scale a number, and you call these scale degrees. So if I play the major scale, and we give each interval a number, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. On each one of those scale degrees, we can build a triad. Bear in mind that scale degrees 1, scale degree 4, and 5 are all major triads, hence they're known as primary triads or primary chords. And they do tend to be used the most in that respect in classical music and pop music. Triads built on scale degrees 2, 3 and 6 are minor. That of course leaves the odd man out, which is scale degree 7, and that's our diminished triad. If we look at these intervals going up the neck or in a linear fashion, we can play the major scale. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So on each one of these scale degrees, we can build a triad. On scale degree 1, we have the major triad, 2 minor, 3 minor, 4 major, 5 major, 6 minor, 7 diminished, and we're back to 1 again. And we can come back down like this. There's 1, 7, 6 minor, 5 major, 4 major, 3 minor, 2 minor, back to 1 major. And of course we can also practice these across the neck or vertically. So starting on this C, we have our major triad, 1, 2 minor, 3 minor, 4 major, 5 major, 6 minor, 7 diminished, and then we're back to 1. 7, 6, 5, 4, 3 minor, 2 minor, back to 1. These triads are known as closed position triads because if you look at the written notes on the stave, you'd notice that all 3 notes are right next to each other, either on 3 lines or 3 spaces, depending on which key you're in. What you can do is take the 3rd note from a triad and move it up an octave. So in this case we have C, E, G. So if we take that E and move it up an octave, we now have a major 10th. How do we know it's a major 10th? Well, if I play the scale up and count the degrees as I'm going, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then carry on from there, 9, 10. So there's our E, which is the 3rd, and we know it's major, so therefore it must be a major 10th. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. There it is. If we play our 5th along with the roots, we have our root, 5th, and there's our 3rd, which is now a major 10th. We end up with this lovely chord. It's a really lush sounding chord. So it's still a triad, but it's an open position triad. The notes are further apart. And in this way, we can build our chords on each degree of the scale. 1 major, 2 minor, 3 minor, 4 major, 5 major, 6 minor, 7 diminished, and then we're back to 1 again. Bearing this in mind, we can now start to look at certain chord progressions within the major scale. One of the simplest chord progressions we can have is chord 1 going to chord 4. Already you might be hearing something familiar in that, especially if I play it like this. Chord 1, chord 4. Which of course is Walk on the Wild Side by Lou Reed. Incidentally, that effect is not really the bass playing that particular line, it's created by a double bass and electric bass playing together, but that's another story. If we look at playing the closed position triad over 1 and 4, we'll also end up with a familiar pattern. Chord 1, 4, 1, 4, 1, 4. Which of course is Midnight Hour, Wilson Pickett. Now that's normally played in E. But I'm just playing it here so you can see the pattern a bit more clearly. Another common chord progression is chord 1 going to chord 5, and then back to chord 1 again. If we look at this in our triad pattern, and that was Dance the Night Away by the Mavericks. We can start to add to our chord progression now. If we think about chord 1, going to chord 4, going to chord 5, back to 4 again. Really, that's the basis for most blues and rock and roll tunes. Chord 1, chord 4, chord 5. Another well-known version of chord 1, going to chord 4, going to chord 5, would be Wild Thing by the Trogs. Again, we're going from chord 1, chord 4, chord 5, chord 4, back to 1 again. Another version of this, which of course is Summer Loving from Greece. We haven't had a minor chord within these progressions yet. It's been primary chords all the way. We can put in a minor 6 chord. This was made famous by doo-wop bands during the 1950s. A good example would be Earth Angel. That particular tune cropped up in Back to the Future. If I just play the roots of this particular chord progression, you'll hear this straight away. So there we have chord 1, going to chord 6, minor, going to chord 4, major, going to chord 5, major. 6, 4, 5. If we put in our closed position triads, we get this. Minor, 4, major, 5, major. 1, 6, 4, 5. Another interesting progression that uses the same chords but rearranged has become known as the Axis progression, due to an Australian band that demonstrated the huge number of pop tunes that uses this particular progression. This band was called Axis of Awesome. The progression has since become known as the Axis progression purely because of this band's performance, and there's a link below. It's hilarious. It's really worth a look out just to see how many different songs use this particular progression. This progression is chord 1, going to chord 5, going to chord 6, going to chord 4. So 1 major, 5 major, 6 minor, 4 major. If we play this progression with our closed position triads, we get this. 1, 5, 6, 4. 1, 5, 6, 4. There's several ways to look at triads. You can look at them in sequence as we played them earlier on, or you can look at them as progressions themselves and ways to follow progressions in that way. I would recommend taking these triads and chord shapes all around the neck in all 12 keys, and also listening to as many songs as you can and working out what the chord progressions are, and try and come up with your own practice routines to try and follow that as well. And I think you'll find that really quite useful in learning your way around the neck, learning some of the note names involved as well. So I do hope that's been helpful to you. If it has, please like and subscribe, and there's also Patreon as well that has all the usual benefits that goes with that as well, and it will help support this channel. My name's Pete, this is The Infinite Bass. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.